Hi, my name is Montana Whitehead, and I'm here today to talk about muscle contractions. So, a muscle contraction begins with an action potential on a neuron that sends a nerve impulse through the neuron axon terminal and into the synaptic end bulb. The nerve impulse opens up the voltage gates that allows calcium to enter, and it also releases the acetylcholine into the synaptic cleft. The acetylcholine attaches itself to the acetylcholine receptors and opens up the ligand gate so that sodium may be released. Sodium then depolarizes itself in the membrane of the sarcolemma and turns itself into a muscle action potential, which then will travel along the T tubule and open up the voltage gates so that calcium can then enter the sarcoplasm. Now, in a sarcomere, there is actin, which is the thin filament, and myosin, which is the thick filament. And actin has myosin binding sites here. And troponin and tropomyosin are binded together, and they cover these myosin binding sites so that the myosin heads cannot attach themselves to actin. Now, when the calcium enters, troponin and calcium are attracted to each other. So calcium attaches itself to troponin and moves troponin and tropomyosin off of the myosin binding sites so that the myosin heads can then attach to the myosin binding sites. So calcium is being constantly pumped through the sarcoplasmic reticulum using ATP, and the myosin heads release the actin using ATP, and then after the myosin heads are released, the ATP turns into ADP, and the myosin heads recock, and they release the ADP, and then they reattach themselves to the actin because they are more attracted to the actin than they are the ADP. And the myosin heads then pull the actin towards the center of the sarcomere so that the sarcomere will shorten and it will result in a muscle contraction. Now, to stop muscle contraction, the nerve impulse stops traveling down the axon terminal, and then the voltage gates will then close up so no more calcium can be released. Acetylcholine stops being released, and the leftover acetylcholine in the synaptic cleft then has to be gotten rid of. So the acetylcholine is disposed of by the enzyme acetylcholinesterase, and it is also disposed of by being diffused away from the synapse. And some of the acetylcholine is taken back up by the nerve cell. Now that all the acetylcholine is gone, there is nothing to open up the ligand gates, so no more sodium can enter. And without the sodium cannot depolarize and become a muscle action potential. And without the muscle action potential, the voltage gates cannot open to allow calcium to enter the sarcoplasm. And then the sarcoplasmic reticulum then shuts down so that calcium stops being pumped through. And then the troponin and the tropomyosin reattach themselves to the myosin binding sites, and the myosin heads release themselves. And this results in a lengthening of the sarcomere and a relaxation of the muscle. Now, I chose to talk about botulism as my muscle problem. Botulism is caused by a toxin called Clostridium botulinum. The toxin paralyzes the nerve cells so that there is no action potential being brought through the axon terminal, and without the nerve impulse, the voltage gates are not opening, allowing calcium to enter. Acetylcholine is not being released into the synaptic cleft. And without the acetylcholine, the ligand gates do not open, so sodium cannot enter, and then sodium does not become a muscle action potential by depolarization in the membrane of the sarcolemma. And without the muscle action potential, calcium cannot be released through the voltage gates. And without the calcium, troponin and tropomyosin stay attached to the myosin heads, or to the myosin binding sites, so the myosin heads cannot attach themselves. And if the myosin heads cannot attach themselves to the myosin binding sites, then they cannot pull on the actin and shorten it. So this will result in the sarcomere staying the same length, and it will result in no muscle contraction. And botulism can also lead to flaccid paralysis, which is a complete relaxation of the muscle where the person cannot contract. That's all I have for today. Thank you.